Good morning.
Welcome
Thank you.
back.
Welcome back to you too. So nice. We both got a little bit of time off. But that's okay. We were able to back each other up.
I
So that
know.
worked.
It was great. I loved your conversation when I
Yeah.
was gone, and I hope you had a chance to hear my conversation with Joanne. I thought both of them were
Yeah.
great as we continue our Women in Digital
That's
Talk
right. And
series.
Joanne was actually one of our Rising Star winners for our APAC region. So that was great. And now this morning, we get to talk to a few more of our Rising Star winners, one for the Americas and one for EMEA. And maybe we can bring them up on stage. So welcome.
Ipsita, Caitlin, nice to see you.
Thank you so much for joining. This is going to be a great discussion. So again, Rising Star in our Women in Digital Awards. It's really to get to know young people such as yourself who are a bit earlier in your career, but certainly doing many amazing things. And so we're really thrilled to have a chance to talk with you this morning. So thanks, Haley, for the intro, and maybe we'll come back. We'll bring you back on stage at the end. All
Can't
right.
wait.
So this is so exciting to talk with both of you. The interesting thing, Ipsita, you are in the Americas working for LTIMindtree, and Caitlin's in Europe working for LTIMindtree. So we didn't plan it that way, both of you winning this award, but that just probably shows a lot of, it's a great place to work. They're really supporting you guys as you're early in your career. So maybe I thought, since LTIMindtree is a service provider, it's in technology, and maybe you can both do a little bit of an intro of yourselves as to how you got there. Is that something that you really were striving to do to get into technology? So maybe we start with Caitlin. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So for me, whether I was striving to get into technology or if technology kind of is something that I worked my way into, I think is a bit of a relative question. So my first reaction is, yeah, I've always been a curious person when it comes to new technology. When I was younger, I spent hours in MS Paint recoloring images pixel by pixel, reading like the manual to cell phones and any other kind of literature I could get on technology. But that's kind of like just one part of the story because technology is such a general term, right? Like, a pen or pencil's technology. And I spent a lot more time with pens and pencils than I necessarily did on a computer. Um, so while I would think of myself as an early adopter of digital technologies, which is what we often talk about in the IT services space, if I look at that relatively to others, in my career today, maybe that's not the case. I was also busy doing a lot of other activities, and I think all of those other activities I did kind of enriched my take towards technology today. So I was very, very fortunate to study digital art and sciences at the University of Florida. Go Gators.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that, you learn like audio design, videography, animation, game design, development. You learn pretty much everything to be a one person studio, and it's very project focused and oriented. And the nature of that means that you kind of center everything that you do around critical feedback. You're always working on something, showing it to others. It's a cool process. And even though technology is, a tool and a piece to tie it all together, I often found that the inspiration and the fuel had to come from somewhere else. So I also was studying history and cultural studies, and that became where I would source a lot of the things that I wanted to kind of explore and demonstrate and work through. And at the time, I had a professor that was just postulating like, what is the future going to look like when it comes to expertise? And he was saying that in the future, everyone's going to be a technologist. Everyone's going to be as equipped as we were then as specialists, but they're all going to have a domain, an area, a lane of expertise that they can sit in. And they're all going to be equipped to do some of the things that only a few could do 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And for me, that lane has become human-centered design and user experience. And I've continued to stay in that lane, even though it's transdisciplinary in nature itself. But I think my career has kind of led to that, pulling from multiple disciplines to piece together, human problems, with different types of technology. And fast forward 8 years, I now continue to focus on, people, process, and how technology kind of knits that all together into hopefully a more desirable experience.
That's fantastic. Wow, that's really great to hear. I love how you pulled all that together to really bring that to what you do today. Ipsita, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. And awesome story, Caitlin. So a lot of, well, a very different story probably for me, a different journey, but a lot of similarities at different points as well. So for me, I think I can pretty much say technology probably found me. I grew up kind of idolizing the kind of work my dad did in a corporate world, managing large client deliverables, projects, handling clients, relationships, things of that nature. I went on to do my engineering, my undergrad in electronics, and then decided not to kind of go directly into the corporate world. I decided to get an MBA in marketing. That's where kind of I got hired and recruited by one of the leading technology companies of the time, Cognizant Technologies, and that's predominantly how I got into the technology world. And over the period of the next maybe 10 to 12 years, that was just the time when the mortgage crisis happened, and all the fallout. That's when I was starting out my career, and uh, fortunately, Cognizant, the leadership, they kind of drove the company in a direction that resulted in exponential growth for them. And I was kind of fortunate enough to be part of that growth story. Um, Started specializing a lot in banking financial services. I went, the next 10 years, I spent doing multiple roles across multiple teams, geographies, learning as much as I could. Caitlin referred to curiosity, the willingness to learn. I absorbed everything that I could from the leadership, from the mentors, any challenging role. I would change roles every 2 3 years, learn different things, but always focusing on kind of banking financial services, trying to solve problems, analyze, getting on that side of the house in technology, because unless you understand the problem and have a problem solving attitude, it's difficult to move on. So um, from then, obviously, I've come. LTIMindtree was my next stop. I'm still here. While, like I said, technology found me, I've enjoyed every minute of the journey. I don't think I would like to have it any other way. So
That's great. That's great. Well, and you're an account manager. I think we talked a little bit about that's a role that you started to take right away. And I know when we were chatting earlier, you said, that's a very people centric kind of a role where, you really are managing clients, you're thinking about what their needs are, you're anticipating, trying to be in front of it. And when you talked about your career, I mentioned, or you said something like you did every 2 to 3 years, you put yourself into another challenging kind of a role. And that takes a lot of confidence. And I think that many, many young people think like, oh gosh, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I have the qualifications. I wonder if I'd be good at it. I don't want to fail. Is that something that you grappled with at all? Like how did you find that confidence to take on those challenges?
yeah, no, that's an awesome question, and that's something that I think I grapple with every day, even today. Um, so that story probably began when I was somewhere in middle school. And I used to be a very shy and introvert girl. Like if someone asked me my name, I would just say my first name, not even bother to mention my last name. I would be like, um, but then one of the biggest inspirations has been my dad. He probably saw the inherent talent in me or something, but he realized that there was some mental block or whatever it was that prevented me from kind of speaking up. So he would kind of push me to take up any kind of public speaking opportunity in school. Like I was through high school and everything, debates, extempores, things of that nature, inter-school, intra-school kind of competitions and events, to the extent that by the time I was in grad school, I was actually kind of leading all the industry events, conclaves for my school, like hosting
Mm.
peers, senior leaders, industry experts, and things of that nature. Then during my early years, my in Cognizant that I was talking about, one of my early bosses and mentors, during one of our one-on-one feedback sessions, mentioned that, while I believe you'll be an asset to any company, I feel like you are very, very reluctant or resistant to change. Like every time a new change thing comes up, you are like, it takes you a while to adapt, like to accept it, and that kind of stuck. So every time since then, whenever there's been an opportunity to pick up something new, challenging, any opportunity that knocks at my door, I usually tend to take the more I wouldn't say the difficult, but the path that would lead to change.
Mm.
So the very next role that I actually took up after that conversation meant that I had to leave the comfort zone of my family, my friends back in India, move halfway across the globe, and take up the client-facing kind of relationship management role. Um, and obviously today, like you mentioned, I have kind of navigated myself to the sales role, working with some of the top banking clients, financial institutions in the US. And I realized that one thing that's a myth, right? In sales roles, typically it's said, you have to be the moment you enter the room, you have to kind of make an impression, or be the loudest voice in the room. I realized over the years that's actually
Mm.
not true, right? And I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah.
There are other skills, like actually being able to listen to the client, understand what they're trying to tell you, understand what their problems are, like the people skills that you talked about, right? And becoming like a trusted advisor to them, especially in the industry that we are, the technology, the banking, financial services industries. That's more important than trying to just go out there and sell. That really doesn't work. So, kind of focusing on your strengths, and like I said, facing the reluctance that I had to change, it has almost become like second nature now, that I always tend to move to the change path rather than the status quo. This kind of helped me, but I still grapple with it every day. So
Well, that's, the couple things is one, we can learn, right? There's things if we just have an awareness of ourselves and where we have our strengths and what might be holding us back, you can work on that and you can learn to or work on and practice. And then, secondly, is you're right. There's no cookie cutter way, like a salesperson has to be a certain way or an engineer has to be a certain way. We
Mhm.
all bring different strengths to those roles, and we should, because that really is what is most successful. And you've really found that. So that's really great. So, Caitlin, you mentioned in your intro the human centered design. And I know when you submitted your application, I remember reading that because I was in EMEA last year. And it was so interesting, some of the work that you were doing around human values and technology. And I don't know if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done and kind of what your goals are. What would you like to achieve with technology and the human place in technology?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. Before I do, Ipshita, I just wanted to come back and say, like, I have so much respect hearing about somebody who is like not born for that type of role within
Mm.
sales and growing into it. Because personally, it's something that I find like it kind of curdles my stomach. It's just the antithesis in my mind. It's been the antithesis of like my professional development, but I realize how useful it is, and I really think it takes a lot of courage to overcome something that is not your nature and to become quite successful at it as well. I think that's outstanding. Like, really, so much respect.
appreciate it.
Um, so, your question around what is some of the work I've done around human values and
Mhm.
what will I do? Where do I want that to take me? What are my goals left to be done? Um, and to maybe expand a bit on how I got to where I am now. Sometime in 2020, when I was still knee deep in doing the work of a UX practitioner and doing a lot of strategy work with our enterprise customers, I was chatting with someone who works in the public sector, and I was really surprised and like discouraged to see that the methods of participatory design that are so baked in, and design thinking that are so baked into how we approach human-centered design within mostly an enterprise level or within technology. This often tends to be missing in the public sector or NGOs, or where it is there, it's often like, yeah, if there's budget, it's been a bit late to the game. So that kind of inspiration, also with some guidance from one of my mentors, helped me focus towards where I wanted to take the next part of my career. Because when I saw that was missing, in this other sector who creates really important tools and technologies, I also noticed, hey, it's actually missing from the process, which is often legislation. And I was thinking, where could I go next in my career to see how I can take human values and bring them a little bit closer to not just end users of an app, but also like us as end users or receivers of all of these important, tools and technologies that get used by governments or by companies that are, filling this kind of huge public service. So at that point, I found a way that I can kind of continue to advocate for human values in technology design. And I did that through my master's at the Technical University in Munich. And through that opportunity, I was able to, take a look at my career from a different lens. So I continued to work with LTIMindtree, but I studied concurrently. And I also took a sabbatical where I could work at the Center for Science and Policy in the UK. So it brought me a lot of new, fresh input as well, and made me think about, different user groups, people who use different types of technology, the policies and governance that help pull all of that together. And it was during that time I did my thesis research, which was with Police Scotland. So Scotland as a country has a national police force. And the question that we tried to help answer with them was, how do officers and practitioners within Police Scotland, how do they imagine the future of policing within that country with the eye that data science is changing how policing happens, and it will continue to change over time? And how do the people on the ground, often the officers or the person picking up a call, if you call an emergency line like 911, for example, how do they see this future changing, and what are those touch points between technology? And having those conversations with them to understand what they imagine that future to be was really helpful, because when you talk to somebody about how they imagine a future, it's not because you want to develop that future for them. That's not the intention of this type of exercise. The intention is to understand what are their fears, their hopes, where is their mind currently? And when you kind of understand what their mind is at currently, you can see what some of their existing challenges are and how that shapes into the future. So one thing people, and we as researchers, kind of expected to find was that there would be like kind of a science fiction idea of what the future of policing would look like. But when we were talking to guys on the ground, it was more that there are existing processes and infrastructure that just need some love, that need some time and effort. And a lot of how they imagine those use cases were not some of these cutting edge and high risk use cases that we see in the news. A lot of it is like there's this big chunk of lower risk things that need to be taken care of that are more on just like digital transformation and getting up and running with a proper way to, keep track of one contact and have all the data in one place and making it more user friendly. Like that tended to be the focus. And more often than not, I've seen, not just in the space of the public sector with Scotland, but I've seen with enterprise customers that there's still a lot of work to be done on just getting the process and infrastructure right for people before you come in and you try to treat technology like a silver bullet. So for me, my work now is to continue to focus on those bits that I know where we can without introducing new high-risk harms. And then in those areas where we see that being, there might be a good use case to introduce AI in one specific area. Well, what's the way we can do this in the most responsible approach? What does that look like? And bring all the appropriate people into the conversation which is something I want to really continue to focus on in the next kind of phase of my career. And a lot of that happens to be in AI at the moment, because that's where there's quite a bit of traction, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that when you said you weren't there to devise the future, because you're right, it can get very sci-fi-ish. But when the limits of technology, right, it's constantly breaking barriers. What the challenge is, and that's why I think often AI is a human story. It's really understanding how we are going to adapt to it, or what are the next phases or the next steps. And that's what you're doing. You're understanding where they are today, which is very important, and how they make that shift. I think it's kind of like the change story that you talked about. How do people go through these changes, this evolutionary journey? It's really interesting to think about how, especially in something like public service and in the public space, like, so many people, it's not just individuals in a company, it's an entire ecosystem of people. How do you go through that evolution? That's really fascinating.
Yeah, there's a whole network of people that you need to consider. Like when you are looking at how people process or governance or policy and technology come together at not so for a product, you can't just think about the people who see and touch it. There's always other people, other factors that have to be considered. And there is a lot of interesting social science around how the more you consider and the more of those other factors that you introduce, usually the stronger the more views, the stronger and more robust your solution can be. So by taking in all these different types of consideration, oftentimes you build something that is able to be more comprehensive, more flexible, and more adaptive to all the different types of people. And this is like a lens or a view that I think sometimes gets a bit lost when we talk about digital transformation or technology transformation, because people tend to enjoy these short, abbreviated headlines of what technology can do for you. But it's one of those situations where the devil's kind of always in the details of how it looks on the ground and who it's for and how are they consulted or considered along the way.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, so I wanted to, again, Joanne Chi, who was our last guest, she actually is an account manager for Wipro. And one of the things that we do is we ask our prior guests to come up with a question for our future guests. And so we asked her the same. And what's interesting is listening to all three of you. There's so much in common, I think, about all of you, about not being fearful, and just really, you have a desire, you have a vision, there's something you really want to achieve, and you just really went for it. And I think that's really remarkable. And she had a question for you. If you could both answer, what skills or mindsets do you need to have to thrive in this new age of advanced AI tools and our new technology enabled environment? Because I think lots of new opportunities, but also a lot of unknowns, right? So what are the skill sets and mindsets that you need to have? And Ipsita, if you want to answer first.
Sure. Yeah. And I think during this conversation, we covered a few of those, right? So maybe I'll just call out three things that I think doesn't matter what's and like I was saying, before we started, that I was actually at a company offsite the last few days in New Jersey. And obviously, it was a gathering of some of the sales and delivery leaders across the organization. And AI was obviously one of the most important topics of discussion, right? So one thing that is neat, and one of the things that was discussed was, today it is AI. A few years ago, first it started with something in technology. Services companies went through that cycle, right? It started with outsourcing, then it moved to digital transformation, digital economy, and things like that. Now it is AI. Tomorrow it could be something else, right? So first and foremost, I feel, and I think, Caitlin, in your journey also, it's very evident, the willingness and the curiosity to learn, right? To learn and grow, doesn't matter what it is. I remember very early in my career, I was like every day in the office. Once I got back home, I would think if I've learned like one new thing in my day today, I'm happy. It was a good day, right? Doesn't matter what those days, just formatting PPT slides, learning how to create a better slide, right? So that, I think, the growth mind that leads you to that growth mindset, right? Growth doesn't isn't about promotions, it's about next job, it's about learning, it's about the ability to pick up something new and learn and grow with it, right? So that's, I think, the number one, to me, that's the most important skill set and mindset. The second, I think we talked about, and that has helped me in my career, is the ability to, or at least the willingness, the problem solving attitude, the attitude to understand, analyze, have a analytical approach to any problem that you come across, right? Even to the fact that why was I resistant to change, right? Something like that. There's a reason to it, right? And try and see how you can solve that problem. It could be a very internal problem, but how do you solve it? Like I was saying, the conference that we were having in the last few days, one of our leaders who's heading the AI practice in our company, he was there, and he was just telling us how he's planning to approach. What are the Caitlin, if you know him, Nachiket was there at that summit. So he was talking about. I know there are mostly sales and delivery leaders in this room, right? So I don't expect you to go and start building AI models and tools, but how do you approach, how do you adopt that new technology to make your work easier, better, smarter, so that you are servicing your clients better tomorrow, right? So how do you adopt it to it? So that's the focus, right? In the new technology world, it's not always about building the technology, of course that is, but then once it's built, how do you adopt it, how do you use it, how do you make it better? To Caitlin's point, right, it is technology, but technology exists because you're trying to solve a problem, and all the problems are mostly human, right? So how do you address the human aspect of it? So I think that's very important, and that brings me to the third aspect, which is the soft skills. So in today's world, I think that's key, right? After COVID, after the pandemic, people kind of got siloed into their home offices, into laptops, looking at screens. There's very less interaction, human interaction, and Caitlin's story tells us how important that is, right? So to build the gap, right, to bridge the gap between technology and human interaction. So I think those three aspects to me are key. I know some of them sound a little generic, but if you apply it to the context of your current world, that's I think that's
Great.
been helpful for me. So.
Excellent. Caitlin, did you have more to add?
I do. So because Joanne asked this question, hi Joanne, something for you as well. I really found how you approach talking about the practitioner perspective when creating and introducing AI tools very refreshing. You talked about the top-down pressure of investing in AI and how sometimes there's a disconnect of what that looks like on the ground. And I think it's so important that you pointed this out and you continue to point this out, because sometimes the lofty goals of executives, they don't necessarily make it into the broken down goals that happen on the ground. And that detail and that connection are so important. So if you're ever in Frankfurt, I would love to buy you a coffee and talk more about this. And I think there's two things. One is kind of added on to what Ipsita was saying, that are useful to think about in the future with AI tools and staying relevant. One is this notion of reflexive thinking. So reflexive thinking is like this muscle in your brain where you can build it up to question your own beliefs, your own assumptions and values and actions. And as you do this, as you create this self-awareness, and you continue to question yourself, it can be useful in your own practice as somebody who uses these tools. It's also useful in your practice as you figure out which tools are best for any given problem. So some examples of what that would look like is, why do I trust this specific AI system? And if you ask that a few times, maybe you figure out, okay, why do you trust it? What is it good for? I think that's one of the big battles that we all discuss, right? Another is, what assumptions do I have when it was designed? I think that's also quite relevant because one part of the story is adoption, and the other is making sure you're adopting it for the right purpose, right use, so you get the most time out of what you're doing. I think it's also helpful if we also continue to reflect on and reflex on what was the background of maybe who put this together and designed it. Was it a finance person, or was it somebody who has a similar role to me? What was their intention behind it? And is there any power dynamic at play here? Was this designed by a certain type of entity, group, or power? How does this change from one group to another? I think that's a good muscle for everyone to kind of learn how to use. And aside from that, which is quite tough, but there's some great literature on it that I'm happy to point anyone to if they reach out to me. The other is, I think, Ipsita, when you were talking about how tech changes from year to year, and 1 year it's AI, a few years ago it was something else. I'd like to remind everyone that a few years ago we were talking about like the metaverse, and we were talking about meme coin. Like, there's technologies that we've all gotten excited about that we are no longer excited about and are not taken as seriously in the boardroom. So I'd like to also say that it's good to have a very hands-on or activated sense of skepticism when you pick up tools to see if they are really going to save you time, and if they're really going to bring value to what you're doing, looking at your specific domain and what the goals are within your domain, because that's the way you can get the most value out of something. And you should definitely be curious and definitely experiment. But I think anyone's going to tell you to do that. I want to remind others that that when you're doing that, you should, if you ask those questions like, why do I trust this AI system? What assumptions went into it? Okay, there's value. Is this something that is going to continue to bring value? Okay, now let me get hands-on and test all the ways that it might not work. And if I can make it better, then maybe I have a really great solution going forward. That's my take.
Really good insights. Thank you so much. And I hope that, I hope Joanne's listening, because those were great answers to her questions, and also really good insights for all of us. Really inspired by this discussion. So thank you. And I think what we're going to do now is we have our next guest coming, which is Johanna Cordovez Amador. She is the CEO and co-founder of Triando, and they are a company that is mission is to empower organizations with tools around human rights, health, education, sustainable development goals, etc. I mean, really is an amazing person who I'm really excited for us to be able to talk to. And I was wondering, do you have a question for Johanna that you would like us to ask? So Caitlin or Ipsita, who would like to ask?
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Okay, so Johanna, when you're listening, we actually had many questions for you. This is our favorite, which is we took a look at what you do and a little bit of your history, and we got the feeling that you're very driven by the humanistic value of what you do and your organization and what comes from your work. And you get to wear a lot of different hats. You get to be the academic, the entrepreneur, and the humanitarian, and all of that, for me personally, speaks to things that I'm quite interested in, as well as Ipsita. And I'm just interested, we are interested in understanding, how do you balance all the competing interests between those different hats? Because I'm sure there are many. So like, if your company creates tools that have measurable impact, not every benefit or harm can be empirically measured. How do you deal with that? What do you how do you keep track of those things? What do you do to, stay critical, but also wear that entrepreneurial hat? Where do you strike that balance? Meanwhile, incentive and profit are always important. So how do you keep that well-intentioned spirit behind the tools that you work on? Look forward to your answer.
Very good question. Thank you for that. And let's bring Haley back on the screen. And
wow, what an amazing conversation. Ipsita, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us. That was really meaningful for me. So I appreciate you being here. And Lois, our future's bright.
Our future is very bright. It gives me a great sense of for young talent and minds like we just, I feel like there's so much that, companies are going to do, technology is going to do. We've got the right people who's working in it to really have a bright future. So thank you so much. And thank you for everyone joining us this week. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you
Bye,
for having
everybody.
us. Thank you.
Thank you.